In our first film, Unexpected, I took the role as the producer. The film storyline is that we follow a young male with narration of what appears to be a suicide note. But the unexpected twist at the end is that he's actually killed his girlfriend rather than going to kill himself. For this film, I really wanted to understand what a producer did, so I looked at various clips on YouTube, including this one by the Sundance Institute. And I found that some parts of the role of the producer were irrelevant to our film, mainly because we were working on the zero budget basis, so the finance side of it was something that I couldn't explore. The main focus for this film was to make sure that the director and the cinematographer managed to maintain the overall vision that we had at the start, as well as considering the health and safety and the general running of the film. Within the shoot, I think that the health and safety side of my work went well. As we were filming in the wood, I had to consider the damage to equipment and the safety of the cast and crew. And for this, I wrote a detailed risk assessment to make sure that everyone was aware of the dangers. I made sure that we did a sweep of the ground, which I included within the risk assessment to make sure there was no sharp objects or tree stumps sticking out, as one of the characters was being dragged. I think that I could have improved my work through keeping to the schedule and making sure that we had everything filmed on time. After the first shoot, we found that we were behind, meaning that we had to schedule another shoot, which then meant that we pushed editing back and only had one evening to edit it, which obviously then created the risk of we wouldn't have it in time, and if there was any shots missing, then we wouldn't have the time to go and do the pickups, which would have held back the film. Film 2, The Promise. I took on various roles in this film, being both the producer, director and cinematographer, mainly focusing on the last two roles. The film was based about domestic violence and how it forced the couple to their relationship to break down. In the pre-production for this film, I looked at various different films, but didn't want to follow one style, such as the symmetry of Wes Anderson or the cutting between two parallel lines of action with Christopher Nolan. Instead, I looked at specific parts of different films and how I could adapt them and use them in my film. And I wanted to create an unease and almost like an underlying jarring tension between the two characters. And I explored this through the lighting, which I looked at the film The Selfish Giant. In this film, they showed two sides, the warmth of nature and the harshness of the industry. They used harsh whites and blues, creating this uncomfortable look, showing the industry side as negative. I wanted to transfer this into my film and gave it a similar, slightly exposed style to create a cold loveless within the relationship. Another film that inspired me was Requiem of a Dream, and although we were told to stick to conventions, I thought the best way to create this unfavourable feeling was through breaking these. And I looked at the scene where he cuts across the character's face, breaking the 360-degree wall from light, moving from the light side of his face to the dark, when the character realises there's something wrong. And I utilised this in my film to show how the character had changed from this loving husband to moving to the dark side of his face, showing the breakdown and how he'd become violent and was no longer that same person. Other ways that I looked at creating meaning was through the mise en scène. I used costume to show how the emotions changed throughout the piece. The characters' clothing becomes darker the further we go through the film, showing that they're becoming more depressed throughout as we move from the light whites to eventually ending up with black at the end. In this film, I think the camera work went quite well and it followed the shot list I created, but when reaching post, we also found that we lost some continuity within sound, which then had to be fixed in post. We also had the actors drop out before, so I asked other students if they could stand in and take on the roles, which meant that I felt that my role as director was limited because there was only a certain amount that I could ask them to do, obviously being unexperienced and not actors themselves. Also in this film I looked at Todorov's narrative theory and how we move from this equilibrium at the start where they're a happy couple to the disruption of the domestic violence and the recognition of that when she threatens to leave him, and then back to this new equilibrium at the end where he's then on his own, where he can no longer hurt anybody. In the third film, Broken, I took on the role of cameraman, and the film was about a young successful pianist who had lost his wife and had stopped playing for a while, and then reflected on what his wife would have wanted for him. And at the end we see him finally going back out and playing in front of an audience for the first time. I looked into the work of Damien Chazelle, the director of both La La Land and Whiplash. He had also wrote a film called Grand Piano, so a lot of his films were about music, and I thought that this could help me. The first one I looked at was La La Land, and I looked at the scene where he's playing in the restaurant where he first meets the girl. From this film I looked at the slow moving shots, which were smooth and almost moved in time to the music. And for this in my film I used a slider to create this smooth motion around the piano, trying to cut on the beat as well to make it move in time with the music and flow well. Also both in Whiplash and La La Land there was a focus on the pianist's hands as they play the piano, and I use this in our film as a basis for the film, and cut away to different shots. And I found inspiration for other shots from a music video of Mumford & Sons for their song Hopeless Wanderer, where we see shots of the piano keys themselves inside the piano, and that I thought looked really pleasant, and used that in our film. I think that in this film the camera work came out really well. I think it was really smooth. I feel the biggest drawback for my work in here was that it was quite dark within the shots, and if I would do it again I maybe would have changed the aperture or the ISO just to let in a little bit more light because they are quite dark. When we filmed this we were in a small room, so something that I had to be aware of the whole time was having the tripod on the slider out became a hazard to everyone else. So whenever the equipment wasn't in use I put it in a separate room out of the way, and when I was using it I always made sure that I was there and that I was careful that there was no one running around next to it or getting too close to it, and made sure that it was stable at all times. For the fourth film, Inverted, we looked into the urban London lifestyle. I took on the role of camera assistant, and I also designed the titles. The titles allowed me to be creative, and I took inspiration from Stranger Things. Their title has a recognised brand image, and I researched the font and used that in my title, as it was the first, Stranger Things was the first thing that came to my mind when we were given the title Inverted. I also used After Effects to overlay a copy of the title Inverted on top of each other. I had one was red and one was blue, which signified the emergency services, and I changed the opacity in and out at intervals of 6 frames per second in order to replicate the flashing lights. This is something that you see a lot around London. I took inspiration from my time here. Another thing that I did was increase the size, so it looks like as it expands towards you, becoming more noticeable the further you watch it. And I think this went quite well. This is the first time that I'd used After Effects. Apart from the tutorial lecture, if I was to do it again I'd like to do manipulation on a singular letter, maybe turning it upside down to relate to the meaning of inverted.